what is one career advice that you would probably give to aspiring like scientists or AI leaders?
I do mentor a lot of scientists, and I think that the most common advice I give to them is invest in research.
So can you also talk us about how Oracle is approaching AI in modernizing their stack?
We want to be able to build, hundreds or potentially thousands of data centers or regions in a year, which is very optimistic.
Yeah. And with that also probably comes a challenge where every country wants their own data center, right? They don't want to hit outside. Like how many do we even build to support all this?
We're trying to solve it through standardization, where if we don't tinker too much around creating custom solutions, then it's easy for you to maintain because it's the same installation everywhere.
I know OpenAI also launched a recent one, like 4.5 or something like that. What's your take in general, OpenAI versus all the others?
In general, right, to be honest, I feel like LLM has become a commodity. Right? They have been open sourced. Sure, like your model might be doing 85% versus 81% of an open source model, but do I really care? Because ultimately it's an answer, it's going to be something that is going to be generated by AI.
How do you see AI revolutionizing the cloud industry specifically?
No, I think this is going to be probably a big area of revenue, right? Because ultimately it doesn't matter what type of AI application you are building or even like what model you're training, you need infrastructure.
What's your advice like for PMs to effectively work on AI products and collaborate with like data science and ML teams?
So it is difficult, obviously, right? Because I have PMs who come to me and say that, hey, the science team is doing something which I'm not aware of, why are we putting in so much of effort here as opposed to some other thing.
Hey Priyan, thank you so much for joining the podcast with us today. Before we deep dive into all the questions that we planned for you, can you do a quick introduction about yourself so that our audience can get to know you?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Vani. So this is Priyan. I'm a senior principal data scientist at Oracle Cloud, and I manage all the AI experiences for our customers who come into the Cloud Console. So, anytime you log into the Cloud Console, which is, cloud.oracle.com, you might come across a range of features within it, which are augmented by AI initiatives. It could include, specialized workflows or AI-driven chat and other type of experiences. So those are the things that, I work for, and I'm the chief architect for all of those features. And in our day-to-day life, right, we generally try to focus on building things that our customers can use, and building things for a public cloud provider is very different than building so let's say like a B2C product. We have a wide range of customers, right? Our customers can span across enterprises, our customers can be individual users themselves. So we have to kind of keep things as much generic as possible when we're trying to build a underlying fundamental for a product, but also add some specialized features that in some of our B2C kind of users who use cloud for some of the small projects, or maybe a smaller company, or maybe it's a small business, right? So how do they also leverage the same cool features of the cloud of AI, as well as utilize all the fundamental greatness of scalability and all those things that come with a public cloud. And on a personal side, I also do a lot of research. So I have also published in some of the top journals and conferences in AI, and I'm also an active reviewer in the industry. So I try to give it back to the scientific community by reviewing for journals and for top conferences like ACL, all the top ones in AI especially. So I'll be there in Albuquerque for the North American chapter of ACL this year. So if you guys are, if anyone is coming there, feel free to stop by and say hi.
Awesome, Priyan. Yeah, thanks for that intro. You have a very fascinating journey, right? So when I think about it, you started your career in engineering, went into data science. Now we have grown into like a principal data scientist, and we have a bunch of audience who would love to aspire a journey like that. And we also have like a bunch of product managers who would love to get into the AI space, learn about all the fascinating thing that's happening in the world. So I want to learn more about you, right? Before we go into those questions, what inspired you to come into data science, come into building AI products for such a big company like Oracle?
Yeah. And I think you touched upon it, right? So I do have a background in electrical engineering because that's my undergrad back in India. But then after my undergrad, I started working with data management essentially. So kind of like, being a custodian of data. And as part of that, I slowly started to understand, what type of data is being stored. Why is it being stored? Why do we even have, capacity planning? Why do we even have forecasting? So that kind of like piqued my interest in the data space. So I wanted to understand more about the information management areas, and possibly get into the science aspect of the data. So after 4 years of working back in India, I decided that it's a good time to go and pursue higher education. So this is when I joined University of Washington in Seattle for my master's program. And as part of the entire program, a lot of focus was on machine learning, data science, advanced analytics, and things like that. So when I was in the university, I was obviously prepping for a career in data science, right? But I was also actively engaged in a lot of volunteering at the university campus, where I used to kind of like work with the startup incubator at UW, which is called Commotion, Center for Commercialization. So this is where I started picking up a lot of innovation ideas, and how do I help these researchers essentially to take their product from a kind of like a postdoc, very research focused theoretical concept, to actively pitching it to angel investors, and procuring funding from them. So I used to kind of like be like, because I had the master's background, I used to help them with market research, which is data science core, whereas also help them create this business plan for taking their product from kind of like a concept to like the initial seed rounds, or angel investing rounds. And then I started actively engaging with School of Computer Science and Engineering. This is where I was part of a labs called SEAL Labs. So the SEAL Labs, essentially, it was kind of like an incubator, but on a very focused scale for computer engineers. So you have people like who build like sensors, or maybe like medical devices for like stoma. So if any person who has gone through kind of like any sort of stoma related procedure, they need to have some devices that actually fit their body, or the surgical incision in a very precise manner, or else it might lead to bleeding, right? So anyone who has had, say for example, like some part of their stomach replaced with like a pouch, right? So to make sure that it's kind of like completely sealed. So the way these engineers were doing it was using AI to map the area, and then use like very precise laser measurement to be able to create these products. So it was very technical, but then when you try to take this into commercialization, you wouldn't necessarily know how to talk about it. So that's where I try to help balance that data science, engineering, and bridge that gap from science and engineering to the actual value of the product. So it kind of like gave me initial idea about not just being a data scientist, right, but also using data science, machine learning to actively solve for the customer, solve for like an actual product, not just try to fit. I have this fancy model that does X. Let me go and sell X, right? So that gave me a lot of perspective. This is beyond my education. So then I started working for Oracle as a senior data scientist back then. But the world back then in 2017, 2018 was very different. AI and data science individuals were kind of like seen as people who are kind of like specialists, and we need to just go to them when we have like this they do something fancy with math and stats. It's kind of like the funny phrase back then used to be, we need to learn to walk before we run, the run being the data science side of it, walking being building something. But then obviously the past 3 years have changed a lot of things, where every product and every feature has to have AI nowadays. It's kind of like the opposite of how it was before. So with that, obviously my career has grown. So right now I'm a senior principal, where I lead an org of like 500 to 1,000 people, engineers, and also the engineering community driver for our org, which is basically kind of like a custodian of all the engineering best practices. So any design that has to be vetted before it goes up for review across the engineering board has to kind of like go through me, be it AI or be it engineering. So if I think about the past 8 years or so, I think definitely I have also grown as an individual, because I have grown from just doing data science, statistics, machine learning, to becoming an overall AI and engineering leader for our entire org.
No, that's awesome here. So the way I see it, right? Like starting as an engineer gave you a kick, but working in the medical field gave you that passion. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
I always see it that way, right? Especially if you can apply AI and data science principles to the real world, especially in the medical field, that's like amazing, because you're actually changing someone's life based on something that you did. You could see the real impact right there.
Yeah, I mean, even now I try to go and look up what happened to that startup idea, what happened to that company, and track their progress, because that's one of the first things that I did very early into my career here in Seattle area. We don't really get like these sort of exposure, or at least when I used to study back then, right, in India, we don't really get these sort of industry exposure with our bachelors, colleges and things like that. But I'm hoping it has changed, because I'm seeing some signs, some good signs.
Definitely. I really liked also you brought like a few points around like how it's not just about coming with an idea, but how do you even sell to the users, right? So that's most important. You may be building some fancy, cool product, but if no one wants to use it or no one knows the value that they would get out of it, then what's the point? So that's really interesting. And I definitely agree with you, Funny too. Like, I think one of the biggest transformation which I think we'll see in coming years with AI is in the healthcare industry. That's a lot of opportunity, whether it is cancer, whether there's some of the most dangerous like infections or diseases. I think probably AI can definitely help a lot there.
Yeah, I actually want to understand a little bit more on the Oracle side of things as well, right? Because when we think about Oracle few years ago, it's a big company, have been probably like decades in journey. And if you think about implementing new technologies like AI, it is not supposed to be easy. But based on my research recently, Oracle has been one of the companies which is in forefront of like implementing AI, and looks like they have a huge roadmap of incorporating AI into several of their products. So can you also talk us about how Oracle is approaching AI in modernizing their stack?
Yeah, totally. And you're right. Like if you wind down 5 years from today, it's kind of difficult to think that, or it would be surprising rather, right, to think that, we would be at the forefront of, AI and innovation as is. Because as you mentioned, we're a big company, right? Like Oracle has so many different organizations internally, SaaS, PaaS, all different sort of products, kind of like working in their own spaces and industry verticals as well. But I think the key to kind of like bringing all of this together has been OCI, which is the public cloud for Oracle. So the reason I mention that is because right now, every single service that we try to build or a product that we try to build within Oracle is always trying to actively either migrate to the public cloud or start native from public cloud, right? The reason for that is it allows things like scalability. It allows for building regions faster. So if you hear about if you hear our earnings calls and what our chairman Larry mentions in those earnings calls is we want to be able to build hundreds or potentially thousands of data centers or regions in a year, which is very optimistic, right? Like it takes a lot of time to set up a given region, complete all the physical design, set up the racks, do the networking, install your GPUs, because nowadays data center is all about GPUs. But it's a lot more complicated than that, right? You have to figure out the cooling and everything. Being able to do that end to end within a few weeks is remarkable. I mean, we have a team which focuses on region build and region engineering, and I think that team has done a phenomenal job of being able to create regions in a very short period of time. This has allowed us to kind of like scale. This has allowed us to be able to take an idea from zero and launch it into production within a few weeks, at least from like an infrastructure standpoint. Obviously, building an application and launching it takes a couple of months still, but if you don't have the infra, if your infra takes time, that's kind of like an added cost and time for your entire project. The reason I mention this is because if you look up Oracle Cloud is very different from the other public clouds like AWS or Azure, especially when it comes to things like cloud.customer, private cloud, private label cloud, which is the Oracle Alloy. So we are trying to build these things in a way that we can deploy the cloud within the customer's environment and still have all the great features of Oracle Cloud without any compromises. And this has been a differentiating factor as compared to the other cloud providers. And this has allowed us actually to be able to solve a lot of sovereign challenges when it comes to AI. So if you think about AI and how countries are approaching it, right? Every country wants to incorporate AI into their country's economic, policies or their economics in general, right? But a lot of countries have this data sovereignty requirements. They don't want data moving out of their country. So how do you do it? You need to build a data center in their country. Now, if your data center lead time takes a lot of time, and then you bootstrap your data center, you build your AI services on top of it, and then you potentially have your SaaS and PaaS services, kind of like offer it in that region. is a complicated process. It will take a lot of time. So, if you solve those fundamental blocks of doing this faster, then your, SaaS and PaaS teams can actually, launch in that particular region for that particular sovereign customer in a very, short time to market, essentially. And in today's space, obviously, whoever launches things quickly is kind of like the winner, right? So this has been a very interesting way that, our company has taken to AI, and this has allowed us to, win different contracts. Like you might have heard about Stargate and things like that. So things are looking good, and hopefully, the trend continues.
Yeah. All the very best here. Yeah, that's a great thing.
Yeah, one of the interesting part which I think I'm hearing from you is building in a few weeks, which is amazing. Because in one of my previous companies that I was working, it took close to 6 months for us to even build a data center. There's a lot of challenges because there are hardware challenges, there are application challenges, so many different challenges, supply chain challenges, and all that stuff.
Yeah. I mean, definitely. I think, bootstrapping a data center region in a whole different country with all the regulation
Yes.
there are some unique challenges that when I, speak to some of the leaders over at that end, if we do have time in this podcast, we can get into, some of the funny details of, the challenges that they face. Not necessarily technical. These are all, operational challenges, but it's fascinating when you think about a lot of those.
Yeah. In this journey, I know you said like Oracle has been investing a lot into this. As you guys have been investing into Gen AI capabilities, LLM capabilities, can you share any of the coolest project that you might have worked in the recent times, which probably delivered a lot of customer value?
Yeah, sure. So we launched a service called Oracle Gen AI Agents. So it's basically an agentic framework, right? And you might be hearing agents and agent frameworks very frequently nowadays. It's a hot topic even in research as
Buzzword everywhere now.
Yes. So with this agentic framework, we basically have enabled even internally, like if you think about services like Fusion, Oracle Fusion is kind of like a Uber, SaaS and PaaS product that has like, ERP, CRM, like whole bunch of things. So the Fusion kind of like leverages, OCI generative AI to be able to build a wide range of agents. They have agents that can help with, ledger services, which is called a ledger agent. They have agents that can actually go and create like, proposals for sales and, help like sales agents, which is a sales agent. They also have, document IO, which, helps with like request for RFP, submitting proposals for like, contracts and that kind of thing. And each of those have different capabilities, and these are just 3 examples, but they have like I believe like tens of different agents. With this agentic framework, right, what we have created is essentially internally. So I'll talk about internally first, and then we'll talk about an external example. So internally, all these teams like Fusion, NetSuite, what we're trying to do is kind of like let these teams create agents in a way where they're actually solving individual customer problems and not really creating kind of like a unified thing where customers have to go separately and do something that might work in the B2C space, but not in the B2B, because the customers are more rigid, right? If you have ever seen any ERP or a CRM tool, you might know how complicated it is, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of like it's in its whole entire different world. So we cannot expect users to move out from there and go into a whole different thing where then they have to do something. So these agents are embedded within these systems, and it allows for a seamless experience for customers. Now, this is internal, right? So externally, what we did is one of the kind of like the easiest, but one of the most obvious use cases was around customer support. How do we enable our support engineers, and how do we enable our customers who seek support to be able to self-serve? And we launched a chatbot for customer support. We had a chatbot previously, but it was kind of like semantic and deep learning driven, which was efficient. But in modern world of Gen AI, obviously we wanted to do a lot better. So when we launched this chatbot, the business metrics that we have been tracking have been phenomenal. I'm just looking at some of the numbers from the blog post, and we have over 600,000 interactions with customers, and each interaction is obviously it's a chat, right? So customers go back and forth within the chat, and there are different channels where customers can come to us from like video, they can come to us from the chat, they can come to us directly. Even nowadays, there is still a phone call service that customers can make. So different channels, and it has been increasing like 40%, 40 to 50% year over year, because that is what the exact growth has been for OCI if you go and look up the earnings calls. So this is a significant number, and we wanted to build something that will kind of like take the load away from our support engineers, because there is no way in the world where we can actually employ 50% more people just to we cannot linearly scale resources, right? Human resources. So with that chat platform that we deployed, even with the initial deployments, what we observed is we're able to deflect 90% of this growth through AI. So that has been a huge success, and it uses the agentic framework with different type of agents in the back end. So yeah, I mean, it's been a good journey for that particular service.
Yeah, and especially when I think about support, I mean, support is the most common use case that I typically hear when I ask a company, hey, how are you using AI? We had multiple directors and CPOs who are using AI, and the first use case they talk about is support. One interesting question that I have is, what is your, I don't know if you guys measured like a happiness rate or success rate for a customer coming and doing a conversation? What we are struggling, to be very honest, is customers come and they just generically tell something, but in order for us to correlate that to an actual problem has been an interesting problem that we have been facing. Do you guys see something like that?
Yes. So our approach has been very interesting. So we actually started from customer pain point. So we did not just, build like, hey, let's go and build a chatbot that can, answer customers' questions and hope that, the customer is happy and, they don't bug us, right? So we started with the pain points. So obviously, like, we have a lot of data that gets generated with us every year. So one of the interesting approaches that we took was kind of like look at all of the interactions that we have and identify groups of issues and then classify them into different areas. You could have groups of issues which are related to kind of like accounts and billing and those kind of things, because that's a big area. But then you could also have technical issues, and within technical issues we tried to group them into like kind of like multiple buckets. The biggest buckets that we observed were the how-tos. How do I do this? Now, every service, when they launch in the cloud, they try to create documentation, but then many times it's not enough. So by looking at what our customers are reaching out to us for and identifying, these are the how-tos, these are the troubleshooting areas, we then kind of like created this sort of like a knowledge graph where we could say, okay, based on, the type of question they're asking, this is the knowledge base that needs to be invoked in kind of like in a RAG and a reasoning LLM setup. So this has actually helped us to kind of like focus our answers to the type of questions that the customers have been reacting or asking for. But then what do we do post chat? Like after the chat is closed, do we even know the issue was solved, right? So we try to do extensive machine learning and AI. We have like kind of like a range of models that assess the conversation in a multifaceted way. The reason I mentioned multifaceted is because we don't just track, like a sentiment, right? We also look at the different themes within the conversation. And we actually have like a very unique way that we're trying to patent of analyzing the customer's entire conversation, which could be looking at the individual pieces, the individual turn-wise conversation, as well as kind of like a theme-driven conversation. Because if you think about it, somebody might come into support asking, hey, like I have 4xx error while trying to set up a load balancer. But then the issue could actually be with some port not being opened, or maybe some security list rule not being listed in their subnet. So how do you account for those? Because this is kind of like a multifaceted conversation where the first couple of questions were around load balancer issues, but then slowly it has now gone from load balancer into a security list and a subnet and a VCN type of question. So to be able to track these sort of things helps you identify which areas need more focus, which areas need automation, features, workflows, documentation. And this is kind of like everything is post the fact, right? You try to obviously analyze things on the fly, but on the fly is mostly to help like a live chat engineer who is the second level of escalation. Basically, your customers are coming to chat, they're chatting with an AI, and then they might want to speak to like a human. So that is kind of like your second level. So you might try to implement some processes that help in an AI-driven manner that provide some more context to these engineers who are live chatting with the customers. But then once the chat is done, you analyze these things, you measure these sentiment shifts, so initial versus final versus average, and thematic sentiments as well, to give you an idea of what these exact pain points are within a conversation and how do you measure it week over week, how do you measure it month over month. Is it going down? Is it going down especially after you deployed something, or is it going up, maybe you messed something up with a new deployment and they're not happy with it, they will definitely come asking for it, right? Hey, where did this button go? Where did this feature go? I was able to do this previously, but I'm not. So that gives you an idea of like kind of a touch with the customers and, kind of like, acting a little bit faster.
That makes sense. Yeah, that is still a problem that we continually face. Maybe that's something that we have to look into. Like, how do we continually train the model? And especially these nuances that you're talking about, they could be starting with something else, but the eventual problem could be something else, or they could be switching the conversations. That's something we need to learn as well.
So you bring up a really good point. I mean, nowadays there's a lot of pressure within companies, within teams. Okay, can you go and do something with AI? Can you just fit something with AI within your product? And a lot of them, and because of that pressure, delivery and all, I think we probably are just trying to go fit in something than nothing. And at the same time, we're not looking. I feel like we probably have to spend some more discovery with customers. Okay, is this what you are looking for? Will this be helpful to you at all or not? Which also was one of my questions, I think, which you answered.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So I know we want to shift the gears slightly a bit. I know we talked about success. We talked about some of the things that we need to keep in mind when fitting AI into our products and all. Can you share any maybe failure story? I mean, not maybe an oracle or from your general experience too, because I see a lot of people doing different stuff with AI. But honestly, I think there's a lot of crap too, which probably is not useful. From your observation, I mean, if you don't want to name the product, that's fine, but just like maybe in general mental model or what probably doesn't work.
Yeah, sure. So definitely, I think the most obvious example, it hasn't failed today, but I believe that, some of it will fail is if you look at the proliferation of all these, chat-based AI services. So the other day I was reading an article and then, somebody posted a screenshot of their phone and they had like, 15 different apps like ChatGPT, Copilot, Gemini, Claude, Mixtral, DeepSeek, and it's kind of like a proliferation of all these chats. So, from customer's point of view, right? Like, so where do I go to ask a question? Where do I go, and how do I know which is better than? Sure, like Claude might do coding better than others, and maybe ChatGPT has overall a more balanced product. Maybe DeepSeek solves mathematical questions a little bit better. But as a customer, right? Like, where do I go? Do I open each of these 15 different chat apps on my phone and ask a question? So it's kind of like a very kind of like, I feel like that space is getting crowded out. And obviously, a lot of those are going to fade. And we also have historical trend for it, right? Like if you think about something like, Google Lens, for example, right? Google Glasses, right? So Google Glasses was probably a little bit ahead of its time. Right nowadays we see like those Meta AR glasses, which is kind of like similar to that, but then Google Glass was launched so many years ago. But then it required like customers to change how they consume that product, right? Like the behavior. So you have to memorize, okay, I need to go here, do this. Now I have to ask this type of questions, only these type of questions. So anytime you introduce these sort of like drastic changes in how user interacts with the product or a feature, it is kind of like destined to fail. Some of it may not, if your product is kind of like, revolutionary, for example, like the fingerprint scanner on your phone, on the iPhone. But then those things were embedded in a very subtle and a nice manner, which augmented the entire experience. And it was not like a brand new product on its own. So whenever we try to build, and you touched upon this, I think in a previous statement where you mentioned that, we try to build for the AI algorithm, right? Building for AI versus building for customers, right? You have a model which you train. Your model does XYZ better than ABC. So you try to, okay, now let me try to fit this XYZ and sell it to customers, right? But then you need to do that customer discovery part where you understand what their pain points are and how your XYZ can maybe transform to, X hat, Y hat, or Z hat. And then those could be the new features. Instead of, directly going and saying, hey, I have built this classification model. It can classify whatever. Customers go and, feel free to use it for your thing. So whenever you try to build something without enough customer discovery, when you try to build something which has a lot more touch points and it requires customers to deviate from their usual behavior, it will fail.
Yeah, that's a really good point because one pattern which I think which you also brought up, which I'm also seeing is these are, I feel like, I know it's not exact same apples to apples, but these are, I feel like these are behaving like an individual SaaS products on its own, because I feel like SaaS, I don't know the future of SaaS with AI and all. Like if you have to go to multiple different SaaS products to do multiple things, then I mean, eventually there's someone gonna come who's gonna integrate all one and just provide one solution.
Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of like apps that are kind of like based on they just use like GPT APIs, right?
Yes.
So if they use OpenAI APIs today, OpenAI could just easily just add that feature into their service directly, and then bam, like your service is out of business,
Yes.
right? Because there is not enough ingenuity, there is not enough thought process there's no moat basically in your product.
Yes. Definitely.
Priyan, when you're talking about like people having multiple apps, I feel like I'm one of them. I have multiple apps downloaded both on my MacBook and on my phone, and I keep trying to like switch between one or the other if I don't like an answer from the other one. So actually, what's your take on all of these new models? Right, I know OpenAI also launched a recent one, like 4.5 or something like that. What's your take in general, OpenAI versus all the others?
So I think obviously like OpenAI as a company has revolutionized, right, AI. I mean, it's undeniable, right? Like what they have done for the industry in general, what they have done for professionals like me in our careers. But I feel like there is a lot of focus right now, not just OpenAI, other companies on kind of like over promising, right? Like, because we have been hearing about the AGI is going to come, we'll have AGI next year, and the definition for AGI has been so much watered down. Now no one knows what AGI is. Like if I ask you, you might say, hey, maybe it solves like a IIT JEE type of exam. Then if I ask to somebody else, they might say maybe it solves how many hours are there in Strawberry, because that seems to be like the golden standard for analyzing LLMs nowadays. So no one knows really like what AGI would be, but everyone keeps promising that it is coming. So I feel like with this kind of like wide range of models that have been every other day, there is a new model, right? Like Alibaba launched something today, maybe DeepSeek launches something tomorrow. Maybe this is a distilled version of larger models. But I think in general, right, to be honest, I feel like LLM has become a commodity, right? They have been open sourced. Sure, like your model might be doing like 85% versus 81% of an open source model, but do I really care? Because ultimately it's an answer, it's going to be something that is going to be generated by AI. So if I am to use it in some manner that generated text, I have to actually vet it somehow, right? I have to have a human in the loop, at least for now, right, until we have AGI or whatever. So I feel like since LLMs have been commoditized, it really doesn't make sense to go and invest more and more into building these pre-trained models, because I mean, models that are out there, they're kind of like good enough today to solve different type of problems. So there isn't much emphasis nowadays on the application side of things. A lot of buzz is around how do you build the next best model which does slightly better in all the benchmark studies, but the application focus is a little bit missing.
Actually, I have another question on this one. In general, if you think about build versus buy, this has always been a question like throughout decades. With AI, that has been changing a lot. I mean, even if you think about the LLM models, like companies typically think like, do I want to build my own thing? Or even if you think about, let's say, big companies like Salesforce or even Oracle, for example, you could like go tomorrow and tell that, hey, I'm going to build my LLM model. So how do you guys think about this? Do you want to build one, or do you see that, hey, it's just a buy for now, I'm just going to use one of the models?
So when it comes to like LLMs and generative AI in general, I think the standard approach that Oracle and OCI have taken for now is we don't want to build or pre-train models from scratch, because there are enough models that are out there in the market, and we have some strong partnership with Cohere, where we have also invested a lot of money, and Cohere builds AI for enterprise. And then on the other hand, we are also kind of like leveraging open source models like Llama, which are kind of like state of the art. And on the closed source side, we are also partnering with OpenAI. So we're kind of like bringing in all these different type of models, and we are letting our customers decide what they want to use. So if you think about kind of like the gold rush situation, right, we're trying to sell shovels basically that people can use to dig up their own gold. So that has been kind of like a traditional approach. Whenever we build some specialized services like agents, maybe like NL to code or NL to SQL, we try to evaluate against different models that we have. There is a cost benefit analysis as well, because if you use the closed source, you have to pay some fees, licenses, but if you use open source, it's just your inference cost. So we try to do that analysis and see, based on the performance to cost, what is the best approach when you're building kind of like built on services on top of LLMs. But the OCI GenAI service in general has been focused a lot more on how do we enable customers to come and utilize these models within our cloud. It's not just the model itself, right? It's also the framework when it comes to build versus buy, because there are some readily available frameworks out there. We tend to build our own frameworks because in a public cloud setting, you need to make sure that all of every piece of the framework is basically tightly integrated with your with the cloud backbone. So the backbone is what allows you to scale. It allows you to move into different regions, like I mentioned before. So it's kind of like a standardize and set package. So when we try to build any service, we keep in mind that we need to make sure that we are building everything cloud native. So that way, we are able to scale it and launch it across different regions without any custom work that is needed.
Makes sense.
Yeah, that's interesting. I know we talked a lot about different products and like the customer pain points and all. Like more of a generic question, like how do you see AI revolutionizing the cloud industry specifically? I know everyone is tapping into that, like AWS or Azure, Oracle, Google. Like, where do you see that?
No, I think this is going to be probably a big area of revenue, right? Because ultimately, it doesn't matter, what type of AI application you are building or even like what model you're training. You need infrastructure, right? And then the infrastructure, the easiest way for us to access infrastructure is to go and spin up a public cloud instance or a public cloud, dedicated AI cluster, because it's readily available. You get access to the top of the end, H100, A100 GPU clusters. You get access to whatever scalability you want. It's just a factor of money. Like if you have money, you can spin up your resources within like minutes, right? So this is one of the reasons why I think you see a lot of or at least the top 4 cloud providers kind of like invest a lot into their capex, and we have been doing the same. We are also kind of like investing a lot into building out these data centers with like dedicated GPUs. And I remember I mentioned from our previous couple of previous earning calls where I think Larry mentioned that we're trying to build one of the biggest, or actually the biggest data center, which is kind of like, if I remember, it's like 8 Boeing 747s stacked back to back. So that it's going to be like a super data center essentially, with like H100s and things like that. And then obviously there are new contracts that are getting signed with new customers. Hopefully US government will be one of them. So I think the potential for revenue is definitely there as the entire world moves towards utilizing more AI in our daily workflows, writing a document or whatever, right? Like writing a document is a very simple example, but there are also complex examples, right? Everything needs infrastructure behind it. So I feel like all the cloud providers are positioned to benefit from this very nicely, because they are selling those shovels, like I mentioned. So
Yeah, and that with that also probably comes a challenge where I know you kind of touched upon, like every country want their own data center, right? They don't want it outside. Like how do you even, like how many do we even build to support all this? Like for example, Europe has very strict GDPR regulations, data protection acts, and all that stuff, right? So they want the data centers over there versus other countries, and also I think that's going to be a pretty heavy investment for companies too, while they see probably the returns in future.
Yeah, so I mean, that is exactly why we're building these, kind of like hundreds or even thousands. We're going to build, thousands of data centers, which kind of like scares me, honestly, right? Because if you think about the maintenance aspect of it, right? How do you even, go about, remembering what region belongs to which customer and that kind of thing? With the approach that, our cloud is taking, we have dedicated regions as well. Like, XYZ region in Japan belongs to, maybe some customer, or maybe XYZ region in India is dedicated towards, some customers, specific customers. So how do you even go about supporting those, providing post sales maintenance and things like that? But yeah, I mean, we're trying to solve it through standardization, where if we don't tinker too much around creating custom solutions, then it's easy for you to maintain because it's the same installation everywhere. But if you try to put like some custom implementation for any given use case, then that is where you start creating these silos. So it'll be an interesting space. We'll see how things evolve. But for now, that is the journey that our company has at least embarked on.
Yeah. One question which I had too is this is more, I think, was kind of not probably this is something for future, but like I know you talked about some of the business value generation, the funding that you would get for your ideas and all, right? Like how do you approach, like for example, first you need to build the foundation, for which you need to probably showcase some kind of value to secure that funding to even build a data center. And similarly, that goes hand in hand with any other AI model or any AI application that you're building. Any general tips or considerations that one needs to consider from funding standpoint?
Yeah, so I think from the infra side, like the data center build side, obviously, like it's a different team and org that kind of like works with the customer to understand requirements, and then they go into the cost benefit, like I mentioned earlier, to see if dedicated makes sense there. Most often it does, but for my space, I try to focus on the actual product itself, which is, it could be an AI feature or an AI service that I'm trying to build for our company. And one of the easiest way we do that is through like a pilot or a proof of concept, right? So we try to get a trusted customer. The customer could be an external customer or an internal customer, and we try to do like a POC internally. So I lead the science and engineering side of it, but then the biggest challenge for this is obviously once your POC is complete, how do you go and pitch this to our execs? Our execs being like EVPs. EVPs are essentially kind of like the CXS of different verticals within Oracle, because you can think of Oracle as one big company where cloud is a different company within it, whereas we have the SaaS products. Cloud will have a EVP who is basically like a CEO of Oracle Cloud. So when we go and try to pitch it to the EVP, the most often we get questions around not the specific pilot, but more of kind of like from a vision standpoint, right? Like what is your overall vision for the product? Like, because the POC will be very focused, very narrow, right? It will be solving like one or two use cases. But then the question that they would ask is, how do you see this evolve in the next 2 years? Because for them to be able to release funding, right, they need to know if this vision is something that aligns with one of their key pillars, right? Yeah, because I cannot go and pitch something saying like, hey, if I go and build a LLM, if I train LLM from scratch, if I pre-train it, and say like it's like a Oracle version of something, will save cost. Sure, like we'll save cost because maybe we don't have to provide fees or licensing or subscription to that specific provider. But why are we even doing it? Because there might be open source models that are available that are equally efficient. There is also R&D cost that is involved, right? So from a vision standpoint, they would want to know what you have in your mind. I am a data scientist, so what I typically do is work with the PMs in the space to define what that vision will look like, right? And the sole reason for that is obviously because I work across domains. The PMs generally they're focused on a given domain. For our agent service, we have a PM who works on the agent service. But then I also work with different orgs outside of Oracle Cloud, like healthcare, NetSuite, Fusion, GCS. Those are the kind of like the different orgs which have their own kind of like tech stack and domain. And when I work with their PMs, so I get this broad idea of how this could actually fit into their spaces. So this is where I tend to work with the PMs and define a very high level, like a 5-year vision kind of thing, which we go and pitch it to our EVPs, who then decide whether they want to release funding or not. And if they do decide to release funding, this is when we try to get the engineering setup, the science setup, and then come up with like all the deliverables. The PM decides on the deliverables, and then they do like market research and things like that.
Yeah, I think this is one of, I can resonate to some more things. The most common question, my experience I faced was build versus buy. Why do you want to do this? I mean, when the others are doing it, okay, how are you different? And what do you want to achieve with this vision that they are not able to do it? So now that stuff.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah. I mean, for build versus buy, honestly, like I think we tend to build like 95% of everything because it has to be integrated with the core cloud platform. And if you buy something from outside, it cannot, right? Like we just put it on marketplace and let customers purchase it from the marketplace and integrate with their cloud. But we try to build everything cloud native, which is why it's mostly 95% or maybe more than that. LLMs in general, right? So we don't build LLMs because we feel like it's a commodity that we can leverage.
And also I see that this is different probably, and maybe this culture probably is different for different companies that I've seen. Like when I was at Amazon, I think the behavior was more like how you said, like we want to build, it helps us to scale and all that stuff. But in some other companies, like for example, now when I'm working in JP Morgan, they want to focus on the prime banking, financial set stuff versus not focusing on some of their core, like not their core capabilities. And probably this is where like, oh, okay, why do you want to do this? Can we invest time on something else versus whoever's has already solved this problem. Like for example, we were talking about some of the products and the ETL transformations and all that stuff. Okay, why do you want to build an ETL tool when there is something like a tool like Prophecy exists, right?
Yeah. I think it is right as well, right? Like I think that's the right approach because, like you said, JP Morgan's key focus is improving banking and financial industry.
Yes.
Right? It's not and they should not focus on tech industry, right? And when we try to build our service, we try to focus a lot on the technical side of things, which is why we build it.
Yes.
Right? So we try to build things that are generic enough to be used by JP Morgan or to be used by a small business, but also has some of those additional features that may be helpful for specific domains and industry. But from a because when I worked, so one of my clients when I was back in India was American Express, right? So for Amex, the focus was heavily on transactional data, right? Like how do you make sure you're securing the financials? How do you make sure that you have all those right information in place? You're not losing out. If you have an outage, how do you make sure that your data is replicated enough and things like that, which is the right thing to do. Yeah.
Another thing we also wanted to ask you, Priyan, like given the podcast, given our focus on product management, right? What's your advice like for PMs to effectively work on AI products and collaborate with like data science and ML teams?
So it is difficult, obviously, right? Because I have PMs who come to me and say that hey, the science team is doing something which I'm not aware of, like why are we putting in so much of effort here as opposed to some other thing. And then obviously the seniors and the principals on the science team have their own thought process, right? Because every technical leader has something or the other to add to a given product or a service. I mean definitely collaboration is something that is the key to it. The PMs in general, right, when they try to define the business metrics, the success stories or the success metrics, what the product would look like, and to a lot of extent they also define the engineering targets, right? Like what should your latency be, or what should your throughput look like. And from a science side, they might want specific metrics that help with explainability and building trust with the product from a customer point of view. So I think that initial market research is where they need to connect with the science leaders and the engineering leaders. They don't have to connect with every individual, but at least the key individuals on the team to make sure that they have some sort of alignment in terms of what they think the vision should be. And for the PMs, they will get a lot of pushback, right? Like if you ask your team to reduce latency from 15 seconds to 5 seconds, you're going to get a lot of pushback, right? But I think based on your market research and understanding of the competitors products and offerings, if you think that is the right thing, it is important to kind of like stick to your conviction, basically, right, of what is right, and then push the teams harder to be able to deliver that. And it could be an iterative approach. It doesn't have to be that everything gets done on day one. You could spread it up into different phases. Let's say that you might want to launch a beta version of it as is, and then improve and iterate upon it. So kind of like act now, iterate approach that allows you to learn from your previous mistakes, from your previous versions. But then by the time you're ready to go globally available, ready to go GA, you essentially have something that is highly competitive in the market. It ticks all of the checkboxes that you had in your mind for the product, and you haven't basically antagonized your engineers or your scientists throughout this entire process.
Oh, that sounds great, Priyan. Yeah, I know we spent a lot of time. Before we close the pod, I have a couple of questions. One is, what is one career advice that you would probably give to aspiring like scientists or AI leaders? And the second one is, which goes probably hand in hand with that, is what kind of resources that they can utilize?
Yeah, I think for the scientists, I do mentor a lot of scientists, and I think that the most common advice I give to them is invest in research, right? Especially in today's world, try to push that barrier when you're working on something. And if you so many times what happens when you're doing scientific research, specifically AI related, is you might come across something which improves your model, right? But then in a scientific mindset, you would ideally question it, right? Like, okay, why did this happen? It's not an accidental finding, right? Everything has some explanation to it, and in most of the cases, it's probably a mathematical explanation, right? So if you stumble upon any improvement, try to see why it is happening, and the best way to do that is obviously staying connected with reading like papers and research publications that happen in the AI industry. Nowadays there is a lot, so it's good that we have LLMs, right? So you could upload your, let's say on a given day you keep like 30 minutes to 1 hour just to kind of like improve your understanding of what is out there in the industry, right? You could upload like 5 to 10 papers and get like a summarized version of it through the LLMs, and then go and see if you're interested in one or two, you can go and read that paper. So reading some of these scientific papers and research will actually enable scientists to improve their thought process, and also see how this is being applied, how the improvements are being made in a model setting, or on an application side, what type of problems are being solved by using some of these frameworks, some of these approaches. So if they do this, at some point, the data scientists, the applied scientists are also going to write a paper on their own that you're still going to go and publish. And this gives a good, career, kind of like a star, so to say, right? Like, because if you're in the industry and if you're published, you're kind of like, that, you are an actual scientist, right? Not to say that those who haven't, obviously maybe they don't have enough time. For the engineers and the product managers, it's more of trying to kind of like when you approach a problem, right? So this is specifically for PMs, right? So when you approach a problem, start backward, basically, right? Like start from the customer pain point, because I feel like that is one of the biggest things that a lot of PMs not necessarily overlook, but they might try to kind of like gloss over and say, yes, I mean, this is solving some pain point, right? Just thinking out loud. But if you start backward, if you start from the pain point, you will definitely identify areas, right? Like one of the examples I gave was for the chatbot. So for the chatbot or the agent, right? If you analyze your data, if you come across, hey, there is this issue of customers not being able to upload their SSH keys or certificates in an efficient manner, they always run into some issues. So if you identify that, that is a potential workflow automation using AI that you can do. So that allows you to actually solve for pain points that are actual pain points and not just something that is out there in the industry. Because in the industry there are thousands of pain points, but that doesn't necessarily transform to what your customers are seeing. Because I might try to build something that most of the customers who are, say for example, Srinath has some issues, right? But it could be a Azure specific issue. It could be some feature that might improve how the different services within Azure works, but that might not necessarily transform to something that customers on my cloud see. Specifically, given the way that we have structured our cloud, which is kind of like private label cloud at customer and things like that. So the challenges are unique. So you can only surface those by looking at your data. It could be clickstream data, it could be direct customer touch points, it could be indirect touch points where you do some machine learning to identify why they're reaching out to you. So starting from there, building on top of that, defining your success criteria on top of it allows you to keep your vision focused of whatever you're building, whether it is working or not. And the last thing I would say, especially for product, is fail, but fail fast, right? So if you are doing anything, if you take an iterative approach, if you fail fast, you can actually pivot to something else, right? Because sometimes we'll make mistakes. Sometimes the assumptions that we make, the hypothesis that we make, there may not be enough data to test it out. So if you can't, then maybe work with some trusted customers to create a pilot and then assess how the pilot goes with them, right? And then try to generalize or build on top of it to make it more generic for all.
Yep, that makes sense. Thank you so much, Priyan. I know we went more than like what we planned for, but this is great conversation. Thank you so much for taking time with us.
Yeah. Nice to talk to you guys too.
Thanks, Priyan.
Yeah, thanks, Srinath.